If you want to kind of start looking at the world editor, I think you should be aware of a couple things. Just give you a breakdown of how the whole thing works regarding the files and the game. So we're going to use East Coast as my example here. So by default, you will have a game directory installation that'll house your zip file for the original official map. And if I just go into the game and I launch, say, East Coast, and I don't do anything and I just close it, it's always going to launch this East Coast right here. Now, if I had a folder in my app data local BeamNG Drive version levels, if I had a folder in here that matched this name, East underscore Coast underscore USA, then it would use that folder and launch the game from there. So a couple of things to note: if you go into the world editor, we're gonna hit that in a sec. But if you go into the world editor and you do make a change, it will probably create some things in your app data. Um, in which case, it's not really optimal to like export and share that kind of a map folder structure. So you really need to, if you want to use the world editor to with the intent of sharing a map, you want to set up your structure right off the bat. So all you got to do is basically know that when you can take this and copy it, and in this case you just paste it, and I already have it. So if I show you this, this is the folder. Now something you need to know. When it runs out of a zip format, the file tree structure has to be map name, levels, map name, then your data. In order to run it from your app data levels folder unzipped, it has to be uh, just the main map name with the data. So I'm going to cut that out, cut it, I'm going to paste it right here. So now if I look at it, it's just that. And if I go back here, East Coast levels is all there is. I can just delete that. So I'll just delete that. And that's really all I got to show you for this guy. So I'm going to bring this up. So I'm not going to bother renaming it. I kind of have some other tutorials that show you what you got to do if you want to make it like your own name. Map name. One thing I do want to point out, if you go into this info.json file, where is it? Title. So this title can be changed dynamically. So if you change that title and restart the game, this right here, I think will change. So in theory, if you wanted to say put this at the beginning of your list, you would just want to put a letter A at the front. In theory, that's how it should work. This title field is an alphabetical, would be an alphabetical listing for what you see in your free roam list. So you can actually change that. And I experimented. That doesn't have to be the same as your folder name. That can be changed. But always make a backup before you start messing around. So let's get into the world editor. All I wanted to really show you was if you make any changes in the world editor, and you have the intent of sharing your map, you want to do it this way. But yeah, and if you did want to change it, you would definitely want to go through and change this name as well as the you know, terrain, and then as my previous videos show, ground cover. All these JSONs need to be repathed, and you would have to deal with that separately. This is just a basic introduction to the world editor. And one other point, if you don't do it like this and you just make some changes in the world editor and you save it and you think you broke something, all you have to do is make sure that this levels folder doesn't have anything that says your map name. So that way it will launch from the official zip file. So if you break something, don't worry, you can always just delete what's in here. If you're in doubt, just paste it on your desktop to keep it as a backup. Relaunch the game and see if your changes go away. So the idea is if this folder is empty, it will just launch whatever you have in your official or your mods. So if you're playing around in the world editor, you're not really, you don't have anything to worry about. When I launch East Coast, it's just going to be launching right now from my app data levels folder. So that way if I save anything, it'll just save there and I won't mess up my official East Coast map. If you did, you know, it won't let you save changes to your game installation. It's very good about saving any change to your separate folder like in app data. So if we're in the game, we just press F11, get in the world editor. We're gonna go through a couple things. So Shift C will get you out of into your free camera if you're not already in it. So you can use, your WSAD to move around. So let me just go through these icons that I use. I don't use new level. I don't use open level. Save, undo, redo you can use. These are all hotkeys we'll be using, so don't worry about that. Editor preference, I don't ever mess with that. Don't use that. So if you use number 1 on your 1, 2, and 3 on your top row of your keyboard will change your translations. So if I press J to stop and I grab this car, select them, you get your arrows. If I move them up, 1 on your row, 2 will give me rotate, 3 will give me scale. I can't actually scale that guy, but if I click that and I press 3 or 2 or 1, so 1 does that, 2 rotates, Control Z undo, the number 3 scales. If I want to scale something on all axis, you just grab it by the middle. If you want to, what is it? If you want to move something slowly, hold Control. So as I'm spinning it, I'm holding Control to make it slow. If I let go of Control, it has a more aggressive spin. Same thing should apply for scaling, actually. So Control will make it scale slower. If you let go of Control, go quick. What else? So Control Z, Control Z, Control Z. One other thing. So if you press the number 1 and you move something around, if you want to snap it somewhere, just do Control Alt click. It'll snap the origin wherever your ground terrain is. So it'll essentially snap the origin to the ground terrain. Now sometimes it doesn't work all the time, but this is flat against the terrain. Other objects may be hit or miss, so if you do that, just take a look at the bottom, like this trash can. If I pick it up, Control Alt click, it basically, you can see it's right on the ground, but here we're going too far. Okay, translate, rotate, scale. Local coordinates, I don't ever use that. Grid snap, I don't ever use that, but if you want, you can always, number 1, you can always snap to grid if you wanted to do it that way. I don't ever use it. It doesn't give me enough flexibility, but you could do it. Doesn't affect rotation, only affects translation. That's snap to grid. Now you can actually set the sensitivity of the grid snap. So let's say I did 0.1, what does that do? It's a little bit more fine of a snap, see how it's very fine. And if I went all the way up to like 2.5, see how it's like real big snapping. So I'm going to turn that off. I don't usually use snapping, but it can definitely come into handy. So this rotate snap, that's a degree angle. So what is it, 15 degrees, 45 degrees. So if I hit 2, let's see, does that work? Well, it's supposed to work. Maybe it doesn't work. Anyway, that's just a rotate snap. So the terrain snap, I do sometimes use. If I use my number 1 to translate, you can see how it's like snapping kind of to the ground. If you do it that way, it levels it out kind of. But if I take it and I do Control Alt click right here, you'll see it snaps more to the terrain. So play with it. Terrain snap can work sometimes. Other times it doesn't always work. And then if you have snapping on, you won't be able to really lift it off, or terrain snapping on. So just turn that off. If I like that, turn it back on, it'll snap. So that's that. So object select, if you're not in object select, like you're in another mode and this object select isn't orange, you won't be able to click anything. So in order to click something, you have to be in object select, anything. Create object. You can do things like, let's say I create, you can go through this list. So if I hit environment, there's under create object, there's environment, there's level, there's BeamNG, there's other classes. There's so this skybox is a part of the environment subset. So all of these, what is it? Skybox, cloud layer. Yeah, so those actually don't turn orange. But if you click it, basic sun, oh, let me just control Z. Okay, that is creating. Control Z, control Z, control Z. Just gonna control Z all that. So some of these things will create based on a click. Other things only create based on you clicking in the world. So like see how I create basic sun, that did something. I'm gonna control Z. But if I create a water block, I have to click. So see how it's cursored? Now I'll click. Then I have to go to the object select, click it again, and then I can mess with it. Let's go to my window. So window, let me show you all the windows that you'll be using. Probably should have done that first. But window, asset browser. It's a big one. You can always minimize them. Window, inspector, I use that a lot. I'll show you this again in a second. Window, material editor, I see that a lot. Window, scene tree, also use that a lot. I use triple screen so I can move these off to the side, you know. I can see them on all monitors. So for now, let me show you my inspector. So this guy right here, this will be my inspector window for any object you're looking at. So let's say this trash can. We'll just go through it real quick. It's probably a good time since I'm on my object select button. So if I hit open in shape editor, it'll give you the shape editor menu. This material menu is good. So if you click on a material, this material has to be in the material JSON file of your level folder. If you click one of these and it doesn't show you the name correctly under your material editor, it means that that item does not exist in your JSON file. So if you're looking at an object and it's missing a material, you should open it and look at the material in the shape editor, click that, make sure this changes to it. Same with LOD vertical, same with any other material it has. That has to correctly show up, and that will only show up in this entire material list if the JSON file is present. So if I just click the sky, I'll click the sky to unselect. See all these materials? All these materials are what all my JSONs in my entire level folder are telling me should be there. So if I click one item, like my trash can, you'll see my material list dwindles down to just what is present in that object. I hope that explains that. So if I click, say, my water block that I just created, or even this guy, there's a couple things in my inspector window besides the shape editor. So we have my ID number. That's a unique ID given to any object in your world. You get things like decals have IDs, everything has a unique ID number. That's good if you're trying to add something somewhere. Every object list goes based off that number. This is just a generic name. You can change that. I think that will change it in the scene tree as well. So if I look for my water block and I type test and hit enter, make sure you hit enter after every field. Otherwise it doesn't actually change it. Kind of like Blender. So now you'll see it in my scene tree actually change the name. So this is just kind of like your scene tree, everything that's in your world. So I'm not really going to go into too much about what everything does, but I just wanted to give you like a little gist. So if you look at a water block, you know, there's settings you can change. I don't really want to go into that. I just want to give you a broad understanding. So I'm going to delete that, select that, hit delete. And a couple things to know. So if you're messing with objects, so this collision type, all of the built-in game assets have a collision mesh like built into their DAE object from Blender. But if you're working on a Blender export So you probably want to have that set to visible mesh final unless you correctly set up the collisions in your object. So if you're just messing with game assets, you're probably going to always see the collision type set to collision mesh final. It could be set to none for some objects that don't have collision, like a pole you just drive through, that would be none. Now this decal type, that will affect whether or not decals go over an object. So if I select, what is that, a decal? Let me go to my decal road editor. Where is it? So this decal road editor has a collision, where is it? Collision, yeah, over objects. So this decal has an over object setting. If that is ticked, then your object that it's going over has to have a decal type with a collision mesh. Now you can also do visible mesh final if you're trying to troubleshoot decals not going over objects where you want them to, like if you wanted to make a dirty wall, or a dirty roof, you can have, dirt over that. But so over objects on the decal, and then that. So I'm just going to go through these little settings is really it. Debug, I don't ever worry about that. Editing is render enabled, just leave that. All these settings at default, sometimes you wouldn't think that they're correct, but they are. I want to show you the annotation. You'll probably see that a lot if you're messing around. That doesn't seem to affect anything that I can tell. I think that's just something automatic that is in the JSON, but it doesn't seem to affect whether things work or not. Can save will, if that's ticked, it will let it, when you press Control S, it'll let it save in your map. Dynamic fields. So if you have a traffic light, this dynamic field right here, that will allow the animations to play and change. That's all that's for. To rendering, dynamic rendering allows you to have basically instant colors on one little object. So if you look at the traffic light, I've gone through this in my previous videos, but dynamic is checked right here. These instance colors, do things that are based off of other things, but that's not what this is about. I'm just trying to show you a broad understanding of how to mess around in the world editor. So that we're still on my object select, we're selecting items, everything's good, you move them around. Let's go up to the scene tree here, since we have this open. Drop points, any spawn location has to be in there. I'm not going to go into that. There's some other videos out there about how to set that up, but if you did want to know, it's just governed by what's in this info file. So all of these spawn points, this way of doing it is, and then these previews are just related to the image files right here. So it just says what's your scene tree name, and that's how you get a spawn point. But just trying to show you what's there. So we're going to look at sky. Next thing I wanted to talk about, the sun sky. If I go to my inspector, there's a really cool video online about how to make your game look better with just F11. So if you type that in on YouTube, you'll probably get it. But he goes through and he basically goes through all of the sun sky settings and how to make it look better with just the world editor. It's super cool to check out because there's some things that aren't really stock. So like, if you're looking at this for the first time, yeah, the menus are gonna look a little crazy, but like when you start getting through this stuff and you start tweaking changes, you really can make your game look a heck of a lot better with just the sun sky item in your scene tree. So check out that video, how to make the game look better with just F11. And man, he really goes through some pretty cool settings that even me, as an experienced guy, I still use it, and it still makes my custom maps look great. But so that's just the sun sky. Let's see. I'm not going to go over point lights yet. Clouds, don't worry about clouds yet. Those are all things that you can adjust and mess with. Since I was talking about making your game look better, I do want to quickly talk about the river reflections. Let's see, river. So if you double click on any item in the scene tree, it'll like teleport your camera over to where it's at. So let's see if I can look at the reflections of something here. I'm not going to go through the river settings, but I just wanted to touch on some of the inspector items. So if I'm in my river editor real quick, I'm going to continue going through these. I just wanted to point something out. Since I was talking about making the game look better, the default reflection, where is it? This, reflect text size 256 is the default. That's not really that good. So if I set that to 512, you're going to notice an even crazy boost. It's in how the reflections look. It's a little bit hard on something like this surface. Let me just turn down the waves and ripples so you can just see kind of too low. 0.01. There you go. Yeah, there you go. So see my reflections? See the trees in the water? If I go to my reflect text size, and set it to the default, might not be too bad right now. But man, sometimes some maps you really see that just looks horrible. In which case, I'll just do, 1024. Now, I don't even know if I'm looking at the right river, but anyway. The reflect text size is something you'll find yourself playing with. So, that's all I wanted to say about that. That was just to make it look better. But let me continue on with my little tabs here. Move these out of the way. Alright. So, back to my object select. Let's go somewhere I can actually see some stuff. Press J. Alright. So, back to create object. So environment is where we kind of were. Skybox, cloud layer, all this. Sound water block. So sound emitter. You can click that. Go to your object select. You can add like different sounds from your inspector. When you do it, you don't want to mess with source group. Leave that default. You just want to mess with the track. That'll play different things like your engine. I just wanted to touch on that. So create object, that's your sound emitter. Sound space, those are all of your little sound spaces. All of these little, where are they? Well, there, I don't think I can see them if I'm in the sound space select, but you have these little boxes and they basically just give you like a sound space. So they're these little, you can scale them. If I scale them up, if you're inside of this box, it'll basically give you any one of these ambiances. So if I went down and just did reverb, some of these don't actually work, but if you're making a custom map, you want to set your own sound spaces, and you'll have a dynamic sound environment, and then you can use in addition to the sound spaces, you'll be using your sound emitter to like make sounds like birds and whatever you want. So you can do precipitation. I've tested it. It's kind of an experimental. It doesn't really work, so I don't ever really use it. If you can use particle emitters though, put that there. You select your particle. This stays its data block. You want to leave that the same, and you just want to mess with the emitter. You can go through this whole entire list and write down what each one does, but make sure you're not paused. But you go through them all. Just make sure you're using this top list. If you happen to change one of these accidentally and you want to go back to none, you have to delete the emitter. You can't mess with it anymore, so I'll just delete it. Create a new emitter, and every time you do that, the settings, like every time you create something new, it's kind of like Blender, the settings are fresh and the settings aren't optimized, so you always have to go and change them to fit your needs. If you do, a lot of times, so if I take, let's say I took 2 emitters, create object, I'm going to do a second emitter right next to it. So if I did that, so let's say I change this to like, confetti. Press J. Oh, it's confetti, but this isn't. I don't want to, go through and mess with that. So I'll just, I don't want to manually change the settings to confetti on the second emitter. So if I click the first emitter, make sure the dialog box of the inspector is selected, press Control C, click my other emitter, press Control V. We'll see if it works. Maybe it doesn't. Sometimes it doesn't actually work. It does work for things like decal roads, but I guess it doesn't work for some objects. So emitters, it doesn't work. It doesn't work for things like ground cover in my last video, but it does work for decals. Um, so if you went to your decal editor and I had, let's say I had drivability set to -1 on this decal road. If I went Control C and I pasted it right on, say, this road right here, oh, it's already -1. But this road, 1. So if we Control V, so now that road decal has inherited all of the properties that I just pasted. It's gonna paste every property probably. So decal roads are a little weird. Like you have to do Control A if you want to like change the node width. If I wanted to paste node width and make that change, I'd have to select all of those points, and I can make that wider. But the basic settings for that do work, so you can copy that and paste in those settings into a new decal road. I was trying to show you that for the emitter. I guess it doesn't really work for every object, but in a lot of cases you can copy and paste settings between objects and things, and they'll go through. But just be careful because sometimes you don't want to paste everything. You can paste some things at the beginning, and you'll find it. You'll find the ways that work best. But just wanted to give you the basic gist. So that's my particle emitter. So same thing with point lights. You can create a point light. If I go to my object select, I can change like the color, mess with different things and move them around. I'm not going to go too far into all that. There's some other videos out there that'll get you started. But if you've ever worked with lights in Blender, it's basically the same thing. Spotlight, same thing. It's just a spotlight instead of a point light. My ground cover, that goes to my last video I just made. That is what maps your grass to your terrain paint, essentially. So that takes me to, I guess, terrain block I never use. Oop, Control Z. So that's an instance of where if you click something, it does something. In other cases, you have to click it to create the object and then click in the world. So just be careful. Oh, it's doing something weird. Control Z back out of here. Let me get out of this. Something's wrong. But so ground plane, I never use that. I mean, these are all more advanced stuff. Me, I just work with vanilla maps and mess with them. You can create a new water plane. I've done that. You just create a new water plane in the world. See how it creates water. You can see the water, and then it's in my scene tree. If I go to my scene tree at the very bottom, I should see the water plane. If you double click, oh, didn't work, but double click usually gets you to the view you need, but if you select it, that's where it's at. I'll just delete it for now. So going through this list, so that's that. So here, level. Let's see, what else do I use? Level info, time of day, zone. Those are some things you can mess with. Zones. I don't mess with. Player spawn sphere, that's how you create a new spawn point. I think that's it for that for now. BeamNG. Some of this stuff you can create a LUA trigger. If you click that and, scale it up, basically if you go into this box and you have LUA functions in this box, you can do cool things like, refill your fuel. Check out my other videos. Just trigger boxes. You can make it rain, I think, but I haven't really messed too hard with that. But that's just what that is for. So that's your LUA trigger. Booster, I don't know what that's for. Not sure what that's for. What is that? I don't know what that is. Booster, what does that do? Shoot you off with a force? That's pretty cool. Never mess with that. Maybe I'll mess with that in another video. That's cool. Boost, I don't know what that is, but parking space, I think that controls the AI parking. So if you have a essentially big parking space, they're supposed to use that somehow. I'm not going to go into that, but just want to show you what all these things are. Waypoint, I think you could do waypoints for like missions and stuff. Environment trigger, same thing as the LUA trigger. Environment trigger, basically same thing. You make a LUA function and it does cool stuff. Same thing. So that's a point of interest. You can create point of interests, gameplay areas. Those are all mission-based things. So that's pretty much it for creating stuff. Camera path editor. Look up some videos on that. You could do some pretty fancy stuff. Decal editor is pretty cool. You can make decals. If you have like a template and you click, you can actually choose things like what material. You know, if you wanted like dirt, you can do that. It's pretty cool, you know. And it sticks to the ground like as a decal. Just be careful with like elevation or like rotation rather. You see how it like kind of, you'll see textures slide, but that's all stuff to play with. So that's a decal editor. Untick it to make it go away in some cases. Never mess with the vehicle livery creator, biome tool. Forest tools are cool. So if you hit the forest tool editor, you can paint trees or you can erase trees. That's pretty much all I use it for. So if I have the red circle, erase by holding click. You can use mouse wheel to make the circle bigger. You know, if I hit paint tree and I go to my, where is it? This guy, this forest editor box. So if I hit, you know, paint tree, expand this, you know, I can paint different things by selecting what's in this forest item data box. So if I'd say clovers, there's some clovers, you know, container, different ways to make that work, but that's just the forest tool. Mesh road editor. I guess I should show that. The density is cool. You can, that's the size with mouse wheel changes that, but you can see that changing, but the density will make it more dense. See how there's a bunch of boxes or less dense. So that's what that does. Mesh road editor is a, you can set the default width right here to whatever you want. If you hold Alt, oh, make sure you're off of that field. But if you hold Alt and then click while holding Alt, still holding Alt, and then click again. So you create that. You can set the default width to 5, and on a new one it'll only impact the new one you make. If you have this, you can do Control A, it'll select both of the end nodes. You can change the node width of all the nodes to 10, say. If I just select the one node, you know, I could just select this to 5 and make it look like that. You know, you can move just one node around. If you do Control A, you can move both of the nodes. If you wanted to set, say, this node to the same height as this node, you would be using the position transform numbers right here. So let's see, 100. Oh, Control Z. What am I doing here? I don't know what that. Rotation Euler. Oh, it's up here. Node position. So X, Y, Z. So that's the Z axis of the node. So if I say 30, it goes to 30. If I click this and make it also 30 height, and then hit enter, they'll make them both the same exact height. So that's a good way to make things like completely flat. With just simple objects, you can mess with these positions right here. Like if I'm in object select, then I can edit these positions. So, you know, set this to 30. Oh, Control Z that. Sometimes the positioning is different depending on where the origin is, so you just have to be mindful of that. But I just wanted to show you that. So that was the mesh road editor. Just quick stuff. Not trying to like spend too much time. If you want to dig into one of these, definitely go check out some other videos. But for the mesh road editor, if I'm in the top material, you know, you can set it to dirt road. Or actually, that one doesn't look good. I usually use like concrete, things like that. Concrete for the top, the bottom, side. You know, make it a nice material. Do things if you hold shift, you can actually expand that and make it more. Hold shift to get a new node. hold shift. You know, you can hold shift and go up. Sometimes it acts weird. Control Z, you can delete nodes. Oh, Control Z. Just delete one node. It'll just keep the end nodes. You know, delete that node, it'll do that. So that's it for the mesh road editor. Particle editor, I don't ever use that. I probably should. River editor, same thing as the mesh road editor, really. You just hold Alt to click, make a river, and then click again. You know, you can make new rivers. If you're in it, you get like, you know, you see around, but it doesn't look like from the outside. So you put them in gaps in the ground, which I'll show you here. Same thing for decal road editor. Hold Alt, click and drag. You can change the material. Asphalt variation, road concrete. Yeah, see, concrete works. If you're in here, the start end fade is a cool thing to put in, because if you set that to 20, see how it fades, or 5, I guess it was already 5. It'll fade. If it's 0, it just looks really rough edges. You know, sometimes don't want rough edges, but that start end fade is really cool to use. Drivability, you'll see other videos about that. You know, lanes left, lanes right, that's just how many lanes the cars will, AI cars will think there's on there. One way, flip direction, all that stuff. That's pretty much it for that. There's a couple other settings that, you know, you'll eventually run into, but for the most of that, that's that. So terrain tools, if I click that, there's a lot of terrain tools, like smooth terrain. It's one I use a lot. It'll just smooth terrain, smooth slope, flatten. That's a weird one if you flatten stuff. But that's also all that terrain stuff is. I don't use set height, clear terrain, restore. I don't use any of these. Terrain painter, I use one a lot. This is pretty cool because if you wanted to say paint some mud, you click mud. Is that painting mud? Looks like mud. Forest floor. Dirt grass. Is that working? Well, anyway, that's your terrain painter. Yeah, there's my grass. But ground model asphalt. And this terrain painter will change the terrain as well as like how the car handles on the ground. So if it's mud, you know, you should hear mud. It should feel like mud, you know. But that's the terrain painter. Don't want to get too far into stuff because there's a lot to cover, but pressure, same thing. If you are painting something, it'll change the pressure of the paint. Don't really use that. Slope min, max, I don't know. That's pretty much it, I guess. Traffic manager, I've done that, videos on that. That's nobody does videos on that except for me, I guess, but that stuff is a Pandora's box, I'll tell you. Script AI editor, that is pretty cool if you want to like make cars do things. Oh, my box doesn't look right. But oh wait, it's not that tab. It's the I'll show that in a minute. Road Architect, that's also cool. Road Architect is super sweet. There's somebody else does a video for that, but just basic overviews. You can create some cool stuff like roads. You can, you know, create a layer with different like decals on it. You can even instance objects. Like if I wanted to put like light poles, we'll just use Aeroboard for an example. But if I wanted to put light poles like down a stretch of road, you know, you can use the Road Architect to do things like that. In render mode, you know, you'll see Road Architect is really neat because you can change things procedurally. Like if I wanted to rotate them all on a 90-degree angle, they all rotate it instantly. And then there's some tricks to that, but I'm not going to get too far into it. But if you are in render mode and you save your game and a restart, then all of these will be here. The only issue you'll have is you'll have to go through and maybe delete some weird decals on the ground that it makes, but I'm not going to go into that. I just wanted to show you the decal road editor before I moved into my final part of this video, which is the window menu. Sometimes I go to window if I'm making like a time trial. You'll see videos, you go to mission editor. There's things you can do there. Window, gameplay. I go in here sometimes. You have the script AI manager I was just talking about. That's some cool stuff, man. You can go through some videos about that. Like if you want to have a bunch of AI cars all doing some pre-planned routes, that's how you would do that. Window, gameplay, race path editor. That's how you create, rally points and different scenarios. So I think terrain shaping, which is really quick. Terrain tools. So I did kind of talk about smooth, but I didn't really talk about like raising the height. You just raise it up, raise it up. You can reshape your whole landscape, smooth it out, flatten it. I like the noise. Noise is cool and makes some pretty cool stuff. If I do my pressure all the way maxed, my noise gets really crazy. See? Whoa. But I think that's it for that. I just wanted to throw that out at the end. Import export terrain is kind of advanced. If you wanted to export this terrain into like Blender and make some 3D models that align exactly to the terrain, you could export it and like import it back in. I've never imported height maps, but that is an option for some of those advanced users. But I think I covered all of the things I use. So, oh yeah, box brush, circle brush. I don't ever use box brush. I hate the box brush. I only use the circle brush. It's just, for some reason the box brush doesn't let you like rotate it. It's kind of useless, but anyway. And then one little quick tip on the terrain shaping. If you're in flatten mode and you like, you go do flatten. Let me do it. Let me do it when it's real severe. So you have, you go like this. You're raising the terrain. And oh, I want to flatten it. So I'll probably start with where I want it to be. And then what I do is I click. So it'll click. See how it's flat? And then I'll just drag it across. It'll kind of make a smooth slope. And then what I'd like to do is do a really smooth. And I'll just kind of get the edges. So I'll do like a quick 1, and then a quick 2 on the other side. You can see how it kind of does that. And then if you really want to get fancy, you can probably just do a road width smooth on the middle. So you're just kind of going like that up and down, and then if you do a terrain paint with an asphalt, it'll be somewhat flat. It's kind of hard to explain, but it's a little slope still. So if it was like, oh, it's up in the air, I want it to be really flat, I'd probably be like that and see how it's just going up. So I think what I'd do is just go down. Oh, too much. Let me get my pressure down here. Just get the pressure down a little bit. Sometimes getting the pressure real low is a good way to work. Just using this little sliver of land as an example, but you just go one direction, smooth one direction. It kind of seems to be the best way to sculpt. And then I can do another flatten. So that'll get me going here. It's even lower. So I can kind of adjust my gradients slowly. Things take time when you're making a map, but eventually you do that enough times, it'll eventually smooth out. So flatten, make it bigger, flatten. I'll even go lower on the terrain right here. Try and get it real good. I can even go lower on my pressure completely. And just kind of start doing this, So you'll start kind of getting flatten again. Make sure it's the road width. Oop. And then you'll get these nice little edges right here, which are cool. You can just smooth them. Oh, smooth them. Oh, my pressure. Pressure needs to go up. I go 100% usually when I do that quick smooth swoop. But yeah, I don't know. Wanted to explain that. So since we're talking about terrain, let me just mention that if you do shape your terrain with forest items on the ground, so let's say you have your forest tool, you painted a couple things like some trees and some rocks. Let me get my inspector open. So if I have a brush, let's just say rock, paint some rocks, rock small. Oh, let me get my density up. Massive density on the rocks, and I go start painting terrain or moving terrain. It'll keep the rocks where they are. So you just want to be careful that you don't mess that up. FX trees, everything with the forest brush tool will be affected by that. So usually what I do is I'll shape my terrain first, get my terrain all pretty, and then I'll start adding my elements like my brush items, rocks, trees. Sometimes you can do small bushes and good stuff like that. So yeah. And then, so if you change something, you move something in the world, you use the object select tool. Some of these things, like some of these items, see how I'm clicking it? It's actually a prefab. So a prefab item is basically a collection of a bunch of single items that are grouped into a prefab, and it's very hard to edit those. So if I'm making a map, I won't take guardrails from certain maps like West Coast or East Coast. It depends. Like it's hard to explain what directories to grab guardrails from, but usually you'll get the idea of where they come from. But the prefabs, some levels have prefabs, which so you'll have East Coast guardrails, which you'll see a small section of guardrail, which will be the end. But then West Coast will have like big prefabs. So the prefabs have been designed and have been packed a certain way, so you can't really like move them around. They're only specific to that terrain shape, so you can't really like go through. But what I wanted to explain is like if you have a single object, let me see if I can find just a single non-prefab object. So you're going to see prefabs a lot, and you're going to go through items and oh look, I can click and the origin's right in the middle, versus like a prefab, where you click and like the origin's way off in space somewhere. That's because prefabs are packed a different way. But like a lot of these items, these aren't prefabs, these are actually DAE files. So you look at something like that, and you can actually look here at it's a DAE, so that's a DAE. But if you look at, if you look at something that's like a big prefab, it'll say prefab. So like this light pole is a big prefab. For example, you can see the cursors on an origin way out in the distance. So that's basically a prefab, and I don't know if I can select that. Sometimes prefabs are weird. You can't sometimes see prefabs in the inspector window, but anyway, I was trying to get to collisions on the terrain. That's really what I was trying to talk about, but I started trailing off and talking about prefabs. But anyway, so you can get like, the shape name on a DAE file. Prefabs are a little bit different in how they're handled, so I don't use prefabs in my map. I only use DAE files. It's kind of important to remember. So that's a DAE file, But let me talk about the terrain real quick. I'm sorry, this gets kind of cluttered, but terrain, the main thing I wanted to say is that if you move something, uh, if you move something, you have to edit and rebuild collisions usually. So if I move that to here, a car isn't going to run into it properly until I go edit, rebuild collision, do that, and then it'll kind of put into place any collision issues you're having, or just restart the map. You could do that. And then the second thing I wanted to say is you cannot duplicate terrains. So let me show you here in my scene tree, which will be my terrain under levels, terrain. So that's just called, I guess, the terrain 2 on East Coast. For some reason they have it called the terrain 2. Usually it would be like the terrain, but in this case it's called terrain 2. I don't know why. Anyway, so you have one terrain per map. That's all you get. You can't duplicate your terrains. Sometimes you can make them bigger, but 2048 by 2048 is generally the like the max size. Not sure if I see any of that here. Here's the base texture size. So see the base texture size. That's 2048 by 2048. So that gives you every 1 pixel. So 1 out of 2048 is 1 meter. So 2048 is essentially 2048 meters. So this map is a potential of 2048 meters by 2048 meters. So you're looking at about, 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers, essentially how that works, or at least how I understand it. So maybe that'll help wrap your head around that. So yeah, you have a base terrain size, right? And all this other stuff in the distance, you probably have sometimes you have like stuff that's not actually part of the terrain. This map, I don't know if that applies. Does that apply? Let me check. The terrain. Let's see. Terrain. Oh, there is another. Okay, there's one terrain. So if I move this, does this move this crazy stuff out here? Let me look. So what is moving with that? Another quick tip is if you hold Alt and use your mouse wheel, you should be able to get more speed out of your viewing, but sometimes it doesn't work. So there's my terrain size. Okay, so that's the terrain, right? And if you look at how this is set up, what would happen if I went over here? Is this a terrain? What is this? Backdrop DAE. Okay. So this is a DAE file which kind of extends a little bit further. Wow. Hold on. Backdrop. So there's my backdrop. If you look at my backdrop versus my actual terrain, the terrain 2 in this case. So there's my terrain, and there's my backdrop. And then obviously everything else is underneath, like all the props, all the forest items, all the rivers, all the water. That's all different, all the ground cover. But if I just look at these two and dissect these two items, I'm seeing like one 2048 by 2048 terrain surrounded by a backdrop DAE file. So if you look at DAE files, they don't inherit the same terrain elements as a terrain file. My view is not working. There you go. So the terrain, you can paint on a terrain, right? If you can understand that. So you go to terrain tools, I can do a terrain paint. I can paint some asphalt right here, or yeah, so asphalt gets painted, but there's no way to paint terrain on a DAE, to my knowledge. Now, that also impacts other things. Like there's other things that don't connect to a DAE the same way, but generally it does work. So I think the way they have this set up, go back, if you extend past the boundary of your terrain, usually they'll have like a wall or something, but I don't know if you can actually drive over here, but anyway, I'm just trying to shed light on like what is the difference between like the terrain, and some of the stuff you see in the surrounding elements of your map. And a lot of that can be kind of tough to decipher. But anyway, let me get back to my final point. My final point is this. If I have a terrain and you can paint it, and do all this good stuff to it, what you don't want to do is you don't want to duplicate it and put two terrains next to each other. So if I duplicate this by holding shift, and I think I'm going to be fancy, I'm going to put it right next to it. And oh, I'm just going to have two terrains, it'll be bigger. No, that's not actually going to work. So what's going to happen is your collision issues so your cars will probably go through one or the other terrain and you'll just fall through the world. So you can't have two terrains, they will conflict with each other. See how this says that? You can't have that. So every map has to have one terrain, and that's the only way it's going to work. You can have a DAE file surrounding the terrain and just have generic physics on that DAE file, but you can't actually have two terrains in your map. And my mouth is getting dry, so I'm going to pause here, but I hope I explained all of that good stuff. Man, it's a lot, but hey man, if you have any questions in the comments, just let me know. Yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say. I'm going to make one more video where I have to talk about how to pack your map, how to properly export your map, all the things you need to look for as far as your file structures, file directories. You know, some person online I saw said that they spent quite a bit of time on a map and they lost it and they'll never do it again because of that reason. So I'm thinking, let me make a video on why or how to actually export your map, how to back them up, how to save them, how to make sure you're cool without, so you can walk away from the map for a little bit and then come back to it without worrying that, oh, it's going to be gone. I don't want people that spend a bunch of time working on a map just to have it go poof. So let me make a video on that, and sorry for being fast. See ya.